There's no easy way of explaining my bipolar disorder, so I have to start at the beginning of when my mental health started declining. My first memory of realizing something was wrong was when I was around 12 or 13 years old. There is no specific memory, but I remember the feelings I was having. Just that low and foggy feeling over my mind and feeling so incredibly hopeless and depleted. I was exhausted. Negative thought patterns formed for the first time, and I just wished it could all be over. I used to think that maybe puberty played the biggest part of me starting to experience this dark side of myself, but I now theorize that the sexual trauma I went through and remembering my childhood sexual abuse also play a pretty big part as well, since both things happened around this time. There is a history of depression and possible undiagnosed bipolar disorder in my family that also is a contributing factor. These early experiences with depression felt like a constant blur of just deep yearning to not be alive. Everything felt so incredibly unbearable. There would be times when I would laugh with friends and be more uplifted, but there was always an underlying space that I would sink into, which eventually led to self harm. I didn't know it at the time, but any kind of pain to the body sets off endorphins into your system, so your body feels less pain, which makes sense because after I would engage in self harm, I immediately felt more calm. This conscious association was very dangerous because it became my main coping mechanism, which set the tone for the destructive ways I would cope with stress and mood changes later in life, including substance abuse and different eating disorders. A turning point with my depression was at age 16. I had a traumatic experience that added another aspect to my mental health issues. I now was feeling pure rage at times and was constantly irritable, but also at times wired with energy and confidence. I would eventually get the diagnosis of bipolar disorder at age 17. I was finally medicated with a mood stabilizer that did give me relief from all the chaotic shifts from deep, colorless life to raging, erratic behavior. This change in my mental health was pivotal because from then to now, I would have bouts of my depression being lifted, but would always eventually plummet back into the darkness. From ages 18 to 20, I did not have as many memorable mental health issues because I was heavily using LSD and ecstasy, which at first felt like I was finding a new sense of being. Given my addictive personality, those enlightening experiences would quickly go from pure bliss to losing myself to the grips of insanity and social anxiety and isolation from the extreme overuse of these substances, which I now know using drugs and alcohol can trigger and exacerbate episodes in people with bipolar disorder. By age 20 or 21, I was very active in my substance abuse and eating disorder. The substances I was using around this time would keep me up all night, and the nights I was sober, I still could not sleep. Eventually, I found myself back in those feelings of rage and irritability that would descend back into the darkness, and I just had no control over my life. After researching a little bit, I realized I was only taking a mood stabilizer, and I also needed to be on an antipsychotic for the mania side of my disorder. I mentioned this to my psychiatrist, and I was put on a medication that completely changed my life. Not only did I notice how much quieter and calm my mind became, but other people around me started noticing a change as well. The constant chatter in my mind was now minimized, and I could finally think clearly and had more of a sense of direction in my life. At age 22, I was working on going back to school when I found out I was pregnant with my daughter. My motivation to get into school shifted to the role of being a mom. and it changed my life forever. I was unmedicated during and for a while after my pregnancy and had no distinguishable episodes. When I was around age 25, I began falling into a depression that did seem to start affecting my life in a more serious way. I did not have a psychiatrist at this time since I had not needed to be prescribed any medication for a while, so I went to my general doctor and he put me on Zoloft. I did not know it at the time, but if you have bipolar disorder and are put on only an antidepressant, you have a risk of becoming manic. He knew my history with bipolar disorder, but it is obvious now he did not know much about bipolar disorder. I began feeling the depression lifting, and my life had never been better. I went back to school and ended a toxic relationship I had been in for 5 years. I moved into my own place with my daughter and felt like I was actually getting somewhere in life. I had endless amounts of energy and had never felt more confident and creative in my entire life. I had so many ideas and things I wanted to do that I began to stop sleeping as much in order to learn new songs on the guitar, write poetry, and stay up late with friends. I was also drinking heavily at this time when my daughter would be at her dad's and would eventually come to the conclusion that I have always had an issue with drinking. And during this manic episode, I could drink endlessly and never actually feel drunk. The amount of energy I had overpowered any number of beers or shots I would drink. The only evidence I had that I indeed was getting drunk was the constant hangovers I was nursing. I had to wake up at 4 a.m. to go to work, so on top of not sleeping much, my body was also under heavy stress from being hungover all the time. I began having intense delusions that the universe picked me as a chosen one. I was seeing connections in life that could not be as easily explained as coincidence. Things were so peculiar and lining up in such incredible ways that I began to think that I died and I was stuck in an endless loop of connections and weird encounters. It all came to a head one morning at work after a night of heavy drinking at an Irish pub in St. Louis. It was around 5 a.m. and 2 Irishmen came into the store and ordered food. My mind began to panic as these 2 men with thick Irish accents stood in front of me after just listening to live Irish music all night. My mind continued to spiral out, and my friend came into work, and I started trying to explain everything to her, but my mind was moving so fast that I couldn't take it, and I sat on the floor and just broke. I felt a release in my brain, and it felt like it was shutting down. I began seeing light swirls of purple and blue colors go across my vision as I laid my head on the table in the lobby with tears flowing down my face. I knew I needed to start sleeping after this incident, and I made it a point to start making sure that happened every night. This hypomanic/manic episode continued on for another couple of months. I was still running high with energy, confidence, and creativity. I also was very irresponsible with money, and people at work noticed I could become irritable in an instant. As we know, what goes up must come down, and I came down hard and very unexpectedly. This is when I realized that the last several months of my life were not a positive turn. It was a part of my disorder, and I had to get things back under control by seeing a psychiatrist again. At age 26, I started seeing a psychiatrist who would help me get my mental health back in order. My insurance did not cover the specific antipsychotic I was on years prior, so after several different mixes of a mood stabilizer and antipsychotic medications, I would eventually find the right combination. I also began my journey of sobriety at this time and was involved in the AA program. I managed to get through school and began working in the medical field. During those 4 years, I never had a manic or hypomanic episode. There were times when I would dip back into depression, but I would contact my doctor and we would get things back in order with medication adjustments, along with using coping skills I had picked up along the way. In a perfect world, this would be the beautiful ending to my story of unmanageable bipolar disorder and alcoholism. But the world isn't perfect, and sometimes lessons learned in life fall short and come back around and demand you figure your shit out once and for all.